So the Ice Warriors is of course a serial which introduces the Ice Warriors, but beyond that it is also a serial which shows a potential future for Earth in the near future, something the show hasn't done too much. This gives us an interesting mix of the usual science fiction setting with aliens and the future of Earth, but despite these interesting ideas, does the Ice Warriors live up to the hype or does it disappoint? So we begin in the future, at one of the ionising bases which is holding back a glacier from the rest of the world. The situation is panicked and the tension is high as the glacier is making progress. It is a strong opening scene which introduces us to a few characters, notably the base's controller, Clint, and Miss Garrett. The two of them are important throughout the serial, with them being a part of the serial's theme, which I'll get to in a bit. Miss Garrett is one of the base's top technicians, with her being the only one with any personality and dialogue, with her being the one in charge when Clint is elsewhere. The two of them are similar in some regards, notably their thoughts on the computer, viewing it as the be-all and end-all of decision making. Now they are still different in spite of this, with Clint realising the problem with the computer sooner, but his pride gets in the way a lot. As the TARDIS lands, we get introduced to two more characters, Penley and Storr, who are stealing from the base. And yes, Penley is played by Peter Sallis, who is most famous for playing Wallace in Wallace and Gromit. Meanwhile, there is an expedition researching the glacier, which leads to the discovery of a strange man frozen in the ice. This man seemingly being from the first ice age, but wearing some sort of suit which is far too advanced for that time period. A very good mystery which the first episode builds up until the cliffhanger. Obviously this creature is later revealed to be an ice warrior, and by revealed to be, I mean it's called an ice warrior by one of the scientists, and that name sticks, meaning we don't learn the race's actual name, but given their place of origin, Martians. With this discovery, the expedition slowly returns to the base, with one of them being killed in the process, due to an avalanche, with Penley trying to save him but it's too late. The scene does a good job at showing the danger of the ice in the short term to the cast, which helps to heighten the danger during some of the earlier episodes, even if the danger does somewhat disappear later on. So on to the trio, who have arrived upside down. More on the side, but they've fallen to the ceiling of the ship, given how the internal dimension stays constant to the exterior one. This leads to a nice bit of comedy as the three try to get out. So like with the previous serial, this one is also set in a cold climate, one that is almost certainly far colder. So we get to see the Doctor's coat again, with Victoria also getting a cape added to her outfit, although Jamie is still in a kilt, which is kind of impressive. With them introduced, we begin to learn about the base and the state of the planet. I'll first talk about the base, which was built in a preserved house, which Victoria says reminds her of a home. It's a very nice set, with the futuristic technology being incorporated quite well into the aesthetic of the house so it doesn't look out of place. The costumes of the staff on the other hand is a bit... I'm not sure what to say about it, other than it looks like someone tried to turn the visuals of a Doctor Who theme into an outfit. It's definitely an interesting design, but doesn't look at all professional. Probably stylish in the 60s, I assume. From here the trio meet the staff of the base, with the Doctor calming the situation by getting the glacier back under control, at least temporarily. This is where we learn that Penley was the base's original expert on the ionizer, but he left due to Clint's command. They disagreed on the computer and its commanding presence, but I'll discuss that more in detail when discussing the message of the serial. But for the moment, with the Doctor's seemingly expert knowledge of the machine, Clint tests him to see if he's worthy of working for him. This leads to the Doctor spending most of the first half of the serial stuck at the base, trying to keep the ionizer working. So the majority of the action is left up to Jamie and Victoria for a bit. This is where we get to the Ice Warrior, which was brought back to the base and is undergoing a thawing process. This Ice Warrior being called Varga, who attacks Jamie and captures Victoria before hiding within the base. This is where things really get going. With the introduction of Varga, we now have a villain for the serial, with us learning about the Ice Warriors and how they came to be on Earth. We also learn that Varga isn't the only survivor, with him using the same equipment that was used on him to free the rest of his crew. This leads to a stalemate, with neither side being able to do anything for a period. This is due to the presence of the Ice Warrior's ship, as the ionizer could cause it to explode. This turns the serial into a few episodes of the Doctor creating a plan to keep the ionizer functional and to make up for the lost time over lower power, while they try and find out what sort of reactor the ship uses. This leads to multiple attempts by people to get to the ship, with Jamie being paralysed during his attempt, while the Doctor eventually succeeds. This is where we need to talk about Penley and Storr, as they are a third party within the story. With Penley having left the base, he met and joined Storr, who hates technology and lives in a greenhouse. For all intent and purposes, he's basically a caveman in terms of how he lives and dresses, although he's smarter than one, but is incredibly reckless, with his instincts being what drives him instead of the logic. Penley sits in the middle of the spectrum, like the Doctor, with them both understanding the need for computers but knowing the importance of human instinct. This leads to Penley being on the Doctor's side in most situations, with him taking care of the injured Jamie for a bit. Storr on the other hand is killed when he goes to speak with the Ice Warriors, as he wants to help them due to their common dislike of the scientists. But of course the Ice Warriors just view humans as the enemy, and so in their eyes he is the same as them. Storr is the most unique character in the serial, mostly due to his dynamic with Penley, with them often disagreeing, but still being friends. Storr doesn't want anything to do with the scientists, with him showing complete distrust on every possible occasion. Penley's the only person who has any trust in him, but of course they still disagree on many things. A notable scene of them not seeing eye to eye is when Miss Garrett comes to try and talk Penley into returning to the base. Storr does get several scenes where he is quite fun, with one of his funniest scenes being with Jamie when they share a similar view of the scientists, with Storr flipping from not wanting to have help to save Jamie to being his closest pal in about a minute. So let's talk about the Ice Warriors now, as they're the title characters, and they've barely been mentioned. So unlike most alien races that look identical, the Ice Warriors all have names, with Varga being the most notable due to him being the leader and first revived. He has the greatest presence, with him being the only thing keeping Victoria alive at times, due to the others thinking they should just kill her. Now I'll admit that I never found the Ice Warriors that interesting, especially in this serial, which doesn't delve too deep into their history, which is a missed opportunity. We know they're from Mars, and that it's now a dead planet, but with these ones focusing on trying to leave the planet, there isn't much time to find out what they're going to do once they've left. This is also probably hindered by the time given to the serial's theme, which they don't play a part in. Now they're obviously the threat, which triggers a lot of the problems which the theme tackles, but as they're not a direct part, it makes them more a means to an end in the serial than later ones. On the plus side however, their designs are great, even if the consistency in the costumes does vary considerably, with 2 being very high quality builds and another 2 seemingly being rush jobs with massive helmets. Beyond just their appearance, we also have their voices, which are very different, speaking in a whisper with their iconic breathing sounds. It's very clear why they took off as a fan favourite with kids. It's a bit unfortunate that they don't do a lot for most of the runtime, although one goes on a sightseeing trip. So let's talk about the serial's theme, that being human thinking versus machine thinking. I've mentioned most of the characters' stance on this, so let's get into the details of it. As explained earlier, the base is partly operated by a computer, with all decisions having to go through it. Obviously, early on the Doctor disagrees with this, thinking it should be the other way around, with Penley having similar thoughts with him believing that the staff of the base had become too reliant on it. Then we have Clint and Miss Barrett, who trust in the computer completely, while Story is the complete opposite. While he doesn't have any direct thoughts on the computer itself, his thoughts on the theme are present through his opinion of the scientists. The Ice Warriors' part in the theme comes from their ship presenting a danger to the computer. Since the computer cannot make a decision which endangers itself, it refuses to give an answer when faced with either using the ionizer on the glacier and potentially destroying the ship, or not using it and letting the glacier advance further. This is where the point of the theme comes through, with it saying computers are important but they can't replace humans and their decisions, which is now one of those themes which is even more important than it was then, or being flushed down the toilet for profit. Of course this comes from a very different time in terms of computers, where they were just calculating machines, but it still has its importance today as they've evolved beyond that. On the trio, who I haven't talked about much so far, they do a varied amount. Jamie spends a decent chunk of time searching for Victoria before being injured and basically written out, with him being temporarily paralysed by the Ice Warriors' sonic blasters, with him being taken back to the ionizer base by Penley. These scenes do give us some fun dialogue and character moments, notably when they are facing off against a wolf, but this is a weak showing for Jamie in terms of what he actually does. Victoria on the other hand does slightly more, with her being a captive of the Ice Warriors for almost the entire thing. She doesn't get much chance to do anything until she escapes and ends up running through the glacier, but this does allow her to be the voice which speaks with them, learning about them and giving her moments where she shows her fear without screaming, which is one of Deborah Watling's specialities. She does eventually reunite with the Doctor towards the end when he comes to the ship to negotiate, which gives us a very funny scene which shows off her knowledge of chemicals. This also gives her a good moment of acting, which is quite memorable as she quickly switches between scared and confident. The most unfortunate thing about Victoria is her sudden disappearance during the final episode, in which the Doctor says to her, while she's off screen, that she should wait in the TARDIS. Now when I first saw this, I thought this was quite an odd and somewhat sexist decision just to write out Victoria at the last minute, but upon checking, it turns out that she had another engagement and needed to leave recording early, hence her disappearance. This means she plays no part in the end of the serial, and doesn't even get to see Jamie again after he's knocked out at the beginning of episode 2, which means that they don't get to reunite on screen, which is such a disappointment considering the last time she saw him she thought Jamie was dead. Either way, it's something which couldn't have been avoided, and so it is what it is. The Doctor does a lot in the serial. Although he spends most of his time in one location, that being the base, we've been spending the first few parts trying to get the ionizer working properly, before heading off to the Ice Warrior's ship, where he does everything he can. As per usual with Troughton, his scenes contain many funny moments, notably when he's writing on the floor due to a lack of paper, plus we have his dislike of the computer and being a faster thinker than it, which is very amusing. Plus his interactions with the Ice Warriors do have some fun moments, where he point blank refuses to introduce himself in the airlock. Beyond that, we do get his serious side on display on many occasions, and Troughton's ability to flip between these two sides is on point as ever. His dynamic with Penley is good, as the Doctor is constantly trying to get him to return to the base while he's still understanding why Penley left, with the blame clearly falling on Clent for his way of commanding, which has led to the current situation. The Doctor basically acts as a middle ground at times, with him being the only thing between humanity and total destruction, or at least destruction of that region of the planet. Overall, the Ice Warriors is an interesting serial, with a relatively good villain. While the Ice Warriors are great in terms of design and are interesting, they're not really used too much in the serial itself. The serial is strong where it comes to its theme, with that being well defined with many characters supporting the argument. The serial is still skewed in favour of the mix between human and computer thinking, but considering that's the best way, then it gets away with it. Victoria is probably the weakest part of the serial, with her basically doing very little for the majority of the runtime, and even just disappearing at the end without even reuniting with Jamie after all he's been through, which while not the fault of the production team, a simple pre-film scene in the TARDIS could have fixed this. It's a good enough showing and definitely a lot better paced than the previous serial, but it had room for improvement in terms of the Ice Warriors themselves. But next time, the TARDIS lands in the near future, where a man has plans to conquer the entire world. And worse, he is the spitting image of the Doctor. Next time, the enemy of the world.